Thank you for joining us here on Office Hours. And as we continue our series on AI, we've got our very own Ryan Raderman here to talk to us about humanoids, the future, what's taking place now and how it's being used, how they're being used in manufacturing and corporate. And Ryan, welcome back. Is that how we do this as our second hour guest? Ryan, thank you.
Totally. Thank you for kind of giving us this Monday slot to continue on the Summer of AI topic. We've kind of been building up to this, and we're nowhere near the end. But we've been talking about AI. We've been talking about LLMs. We've been talking about the different organizations that are bringing different like chatbot type experiences to us. And these LLM and Gen AI concepts have seriously advanced the humanoid robot progress in the last 12 months for sure. Increasingly, you've got public companies on earnings calls talking about the way they are bringing these to market. And you've got public companies on earnings calls talking about the benefits that they are foreseeing and what that might mean for their earning power. And so we'll treat today as a little bit of a brainstorming topic on humanoids, right? So, and I think too, another kind of question topic is humanoid versus the non-humanoid form for robotics, because certainly this isn't the only form that we're going to see, but there are a couple reasons, and just kind of a teaser on that this is the humanoid form is relevant, is that the world was built for things that are between 5 and 6 feet tall and have legs for locomotion and have hands for manipulation of objects. And so there's kind of a taxonomy to this, right? Ways that we can break down the problem set that we're experiencing right now in kind of getting these to market, and the adoption challenges that are going to exist between now and that widespread adoption, and the market potential that we think exists.
And so, Ryan, just for a moment, as we're talking about humanoids and robots, can we get some foundation there for our viewers and really describing what you're referring to as a humanoid and then as a robot and the differentiations there?
Totally. So you'll hear the term bipedal humanoid robot, and that kind of tends to mean that it's like 2 legs, and the legs, are its primary source of locomotion. I think humanoid robot could also kind of roll on tracks, and that would just be kind of outside of that bipedal. So that's kind of part of that taxonomy, but something that tends to have arms and legs, right? The head form factor is something that organizations are experimenting with, because there is a little bit of an eeriness factor that folks are trying to avoid, and that even pertains to the height. So Tesla's made the decision to make theirs nearly 6 feet in height. Most of the other manufacturers recognize that something being taller than the average person is not necessarily going to be the preference of people that are interacting with these, right? There's definitely this comfort factor that's important.
Awesome. And now, what are some of the ways that you are seeing like companies that are actually going full force? You just mentioned Tesla. Who else? And what are they doing that's got you saying we need to talk about this on Office Hours?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, right? We need to talk about this because, and it's been brought up when we've been talking about these AI themes, that we're sometimes talking about things that are not exactly completely commercially adapted yet, and that we might be talking about things that are still early on in the hype cycle and in the market adoption cycle. But we'd be doing a disservice to the audience, is my real point of view, if we weren't talking about things that are a little bit further out, and being somewhat prepared for those, and organizing around the different sources of information sharing and intelligence and the influencers that are actually working on these, right? I don't have the benefit of working in a lab with the sensors and actuators and the brains and the compute and the battery power storage and everything else, as much as I am a consumer of the content on this, and talking to CEOs of construction companies in my case, who are occasionally asking questions about just disruptive forces, right? Whether it's AI in the office or AI in the field. But I've got a couple visuals here from ARC. So this is ARC is Kathy Wood's investment firm, and they produced a research report on this. And this was just produced in 2024. But I wanted to just point out that when you look at robotics, there really is a inflection point that we're at right now. And so the only thing to really take away here is just the number of units in 2022 and 2023 compared to those in like 2013, right? There's kind of a doubling taking place, and this doubling is, I think, something that we're going to kind of continue to see. And this is speaking beyond just the humanoid form, right? There's non-humanoids definitely involved here. Like the Kiva bot moves shelves around and brings the material in an Amazon warehouse to a human. But this is where you kind of can see this idea of humanoids being able to operate in a more unstructured environment, right? An Amazon warehouse is a highly structured environment. There's tracks printed on the floor that tell that robot where to move, and it's kind of just moving in a grid pattern. But the last couple of things I just want to show are just the ratio of people in an Amazon warehouse relative to robots, and just the pace at which in 2023 you see that doubling taking place. And this kind of starting to look at, okay, you start to do the math on that and you extrapolate that outside of just an Amazon context. And that's where you start to see a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And just to give context on multi-trillion, what that means, the construction industry today globally is a $7 trillion industry, all up, right? Labor, materials, everything that's involved in that industry. That gives you a sense for what people that are assessing this from the standpoint of where to place market bets, like what they really believe might exist there for market size.
Copy that. Alex?
Yeah, I think anything that we see that has a lot of labor, usually, people are starting to figure that out. And as the cost of labor goes up, and I think that we're seeing this already. So it's just something we always have to address, is the fact that there are things that I've said for many years, if you feel like your job is robotic, don't worry, you won't have it for much longer. And so, we always have to be careful of anybody who feels like you're a robot. You should be trying to find somewhere else to go, because, all of this stuff as it continues to move forward is going to continue to kind of move into these spaces. For instance, McDonald's has a McDonald's in Phoenix, I think, Arizona, that runs on 2 employees at a time. So there's just 2 people there, and the rest of it's all automated, and they've had that for a decade. so they, this is not, figuring out how to roll it out. But as that cost of, I always look at in California, we've moved the cost of labor up pretty dramatically, and that puts an incredible amount of pressure on this process right here, which is that it makes a lot of things possible that weren't possible before, or has them pencil out. I worked in an electronics company right out of high school, building mainframe computers, and my job wasn't at risk because I built things that were complicated. But there were a lot of things where you're just assembling boards, and the price of labor went from $3.75 to $4.25. Minimum wage moved up. It was huge, to $4.25, and 50 people were laid off because they just put a surface mount system in, because it got over. It existed for a long time, but it suddenly became viable because of the change in labor costs. And so I think that we have to take that into account when we talk about humanoid robots. Is that there are, we always want to look at, who's going to be replaced, how are they going to be replaced, and how do we take care of them? Because there's some, and acknowledge those things, that that this is part of it. But I think that what I'm excited about related to that, I just wanted to acknowledge that. But what's really interesting is also putting robots in places that, we can have robots do things that are much more dangerous than what we can do. So putting them in, whether it's hazardous areas, firefighting, lots of other things that there's an unknown factor, and this AI becomes very important in that area, because they have to not just go in and be told what to do, but analyze the situation that they're in and make decisions as to what they can or what they should do in those areas. And so I think it's going to be, fascinating. A lot of times you look at, it took me a long time to come around to, why do we need humanoid robots? But, because balance is really hard. Like, balance turns out to be like a huge problem for robots. And I guess Boston Dynamics has gotten pretty good at figuring out balance. One thing to look at is when you look at the Boston Dynamics, I think one thing we also should separate when we talk about this is the fact that anytime you see that robot walking around doing things and dropping things off and picking it up, it was explicitly told what to do. It was not figuring that out. They don't have, they're programming every movement for the demo. But they've known for a long time that eventually the AI will catch up and it'll be able to do the thing. And so they're worried, what they're kind of meeting in the middle is we're going to build all the things that the robot needs, knowing that the processing will catch up. By the time we get good at doing the physical part, the processing will catch up and do the other part. And I think that we're getting, we're getting very close to it. But I do think that there's also humanoids now that we're seeing, for stunt. I don't know who showed it. I think it was Paramount or Sony showed
Disney. Yeah.
Was it Disney that showed the stunt?
The Spider-Man show. Yeah.
The stunt doubles that were robots. They fired them out of they had them fired out of something and landing on it, and it was able to properly land on a net, in that area. And I think that there's and I think that for stunt people, I think that becomes they get squeezed between CG if it's too far away, and then robots if it's another place. But I think a lot of times it's the robot stunts are not things that necessarily everyone wants to do as a stunt person as well. I mean, I think that's been some of the. I've had talked to some stunt folks, and they're like, well, I have 3 fractured vertebrae that got fused together because I did because I fell out of something, and they're kind of like, that one was, we knew it was dangerous when we did it, and that probably would have been a good one for a stunt double.
Courtney?
Yeah, and when you're talking about stunt doubles, the only time you need a robot stunt double is in a live show, because CGI replacements in post-production can look a lot better than even a robotic stunt double. So only in live shows would they be necessary.
I'm going to argue with that a little bit, because I find that I think one of the reasons you see directors pushing back on CG is because a lot of times the physics of the humanoids doesn't really work. It's not, now robots, it'd be hard to get robots to do exactly what a human does, but a lot of times I find that the CG, and it's been a problem for 20 years, is the physics of people, of other things. Just there's something off because they didn't simulate it quite right. And I feel like that's the advantage of having something in the physical world interacting with the physical world. You do get something that has more grit and feels more real.
Yeah, but one actuator breaks and it's got an arm coming out of the back of its head. So that's the problem. And then you've got $100,000 a pile of equipment. So, there's that problem. If a render comes out wrong, you just tell the guy, oh, you made a mistake, you left a variable out, change that variable. Then it's fixed. But there's been
you bring up the cost, right? $100,000 piece of equipment. And that's probably one of the most interesting topics right now is folks doing analysis on what the actual kind of like
the trade-off is between humans and humanoid robots as far as training goes. Yeah, right. I was going to mention that.
And what that costs today versus what that might with 4 or 5 years of progress as you get to mass production of all of the input costs, right? Because batteries are expensive today. These sensors and actuators are being redeveloped basically from scratch right now, right? And there just isn't really a supply chain. So every organization that's doing this is bragging about how they're completely vertically integrated and not using any off-the-shelf parts for this. Well, that's not going to be the most efficient mechanism. And can we get them from $100,000 down to $10,000 per unit over a few years is something I'm intrigued by.
Right. I was going to bring that up. The new Figure 2 is out, and all these humanoid robots are going.
Did we lose Courtney?
Lost your audio, Courtney.
Yeah, I think we might have. But
sorry, I was going to say they've gone to these rotary actuators. I just wanted to show some pictures of these electrically operated rotary actuators versus the ones that they were using from Boston Dynamics for many years that were hydraulic. And these are quiet, they're more precision, and they can put them at the joints in a humanoid robot as opposed to duplicating the way that the human skeleton works, where you have muscles that are not at the joints, that are above the joints, and pull the joints up and relax the joints back from on either side of the joint. These new electric actuators are located at each point of rotation, so they can be much more compact and build a humanoid form that doesn't have the limitations of using an exact duplicate of the human skeletal frame. And that's made a big difference in a lot of these new humanoid robots. They're all moving to these electric actuators, which makes them much more sleek and much easier to operate because they're just running on DC power instead of hydraulic pumps, which are very noisy and eat up a lot of current.
Yeah, and just to jump in a moment here, because Evan shared this link from a company that they're focused. It's called Figure. If you go to figure.ai, just what they're doing and their whole ethos is for everyday work and how we're using how humanoids can and their robots and what they're building can alleviate time and just the rudimentary tasks that you do around the house. Let me just skip over to where they had like just broken down how much time, like the physical labor, as Alex had shared earlier. So just seeing that there are companies that are looking at making sure that those rudimentary tasks, taking it from the corporate for a moment, those rudimentary tasks and how they can help to develop these kinds of solutions. Because I think about the other day, I was at, I think I was eating at a restaurant, and there was a robot just bringing the food to everyone. But then what if you had, something like this, what Figure is building over there, but just giving some visuals for folks that are, and producers at any time, you can submit your questions around this great discussion around humanoids, the future of, and how we can use them in our day-to-day life and world. Alexander?
Yeah, the greater philosophical conversation that I always like to go to is, with automation, with robots, I clearly acknowledge the advantages of all of that stuff. I mean, if we look at the trends in the data, clearly automation improves efficiency, reduces costs. But of course, there's the other issue of, well, now you got to lay off a lot of people, and what do you do with those people? So I don't know what that would look like as far as retraining people to do what is always my question. Because if those jobs don't exist, and those companies don't want to pay those people, well, you got to pay those people to do something. So what are you paying them to do exactly? And that's not an easy solution. I don't know what the answer to that is. And I will lump artificial intelligence into this, because if we're talking about humanoid robots, as we make these robots more human and able to anticipate our needs and our desires, maybe at some point down the road, we've got robots in all of our homes making us dinner and taking care of us, and we're able to have back and forth conversations with them, and that takes that whole thing to another level. So the retraining thing, I'm not sure if that would come down to a government level thing, and I don't know what we would retrain them for.
Alex?
Yeah, one of the complicated things with AI in general and humanoid AI and exactly what Alex was talking about there a second ago is that we probably have less of a worry about retraining than we think, only because most countries are starting to go into a negative population curve. So the robots may be coming up at about the right time because we're not going to have enough people to produce the things that need to get produced over the next 50 years. The number of We're about to, I think that the estimates now are in the 2050 range will make you reach peak population. And that has all kinds of problems that are related. But one of the problems that I think we don't deal with enough is that as we add that exponential productivity so one person being, multiplied by robotics, AI, automation, so on and so forth, we don't necessarily, the problem is the money, they can be replaced, but the money is not going back to payroll taxes, income taxes, all these other things that make everything else run. They just go back into corporate profit. So the issue is that we have to figure, this is going to be a problem that we're going to have as we start to go up, and is that how do you redistribute the wealth in a way that allows the society to continue to move forward? And I think that that's going to be a pretty heavy task to figure out. It would be easier to figure it out now, but we probably won't until it's a real problem, and then it'll be really hard to figure out. So I think but that's going to be a big challenge. But I do think that we're going to see. I do agree with when you look at what Figure's doing. There's going to not be enough people, and there isn't enough people right now to properly take care of people in their homes that have problems. There's not enough people to do those things right now. So I want to always acknowledge the danger of these things, but we have to look at we are in desperate need in many places. Construction is a good example. I think that I saw a stat that the number was astronomical. In Arizona alone, I think that there are 300,000 construction workers short Like, like it's not like a couple, like it, and so you can see how, especially in places like construction, if you were able to do this reliably, there's huge missing sections of our workforce right now that you could see robots effectively filling and just getting those things move forward. And it's not displacing people. There's nobody there right now.
Courtney?
Yeah, factory workers in things like automobile plants have been replaced by non-humanoid robots for years now. And anytime you need something to move something very heavy but very precisely from point A to point B, it's for a factory robot that doesn't have to move or use any type of intellect, and it's doing that same repetitive job over and over again. They're perfect for that kind of stuff. A humanoid robot, they're moving to do more open tasks. In other words, to use intelligence to figure out how to place something somewhere. They're using those figure 2 robots in a BMW factory. Although the images that I've seen of it doing stuff, it's like, well, maybe if you were hiring 82-year-old workers to assemble your BMWs, that would be what the workforce looks like using humanoid robots currently, because they kind of shuffle along at a slow pace. And, a human could move maybe twice as fast. The difference is the human may not be able to lift as much or may not be able to do the same task repetitively without, hurting themselves. So you have to take that into consideration. But the cost of human labor is still pretty cheap. You can train somebody. It doesn't take a whole lot of intelligence to do a repetitive job. You train somebody for a couple hours, and they can continue to do that job for 10 or 20 years if they have the need to continue in that position of a repetitive, dull job. There's burnout in a lot of those stuff. But then you got to realize maintenance on one of a humanoid robot, because it's got a whole lot more moving parts to accommodate all the degrees of freedom that humans have, and to be able to have enough smarts, AI smarts on board to be able to figure out a task if it hasn't been pre-programmed to do it. So, that's going to it's going to make it a very expensive replacement for a human, and a very maintenance intensive problem to keep the thing up and running, because if one actuator breaks, then it's got to go back to the shop, and it may be out for a day or two. And so you have to deal with maintenance records. I think they're a ways away from replacing factory floor workers that will be more efficient, faster, or less expensive than humans right now. As far as home health care and companion robots, that's what the Japanese have been looking for many years. That's what the Honda robot that they just discontinued, Asimo, was. But they didn't find that it was practical to continue to, your average senior citizen wouldn't be able to afford one unless there was a government program to produce them massively and maintain them massively. And I'd be a little scared of my robot.
So, Ryan, before we get to some of these questions that are stacking up from the community, how can people follow up or just stay on trend, I guess, just stay on abreast of everything that's happening in this space?
My trick for this has actually been to be somewhat intentional with the manipulation of my algorithm on YouTube and X. So following, out there, an individual named Lucas Ziegler, who I encountered on LinkedIn, and then, following that trail onto YouTube and onto X, and following these influencers. And then Figure's CEO, the Figure was talked about by both you, Liberty, and Courtney. His name's Brett Adcock. He is a awesome influencer on X in terms of, saying, there are 10 things that happened in AI this week that were kind of material, and here's what you need to know. And those are a mix of robotics and non-robotic kind of AI elements, but he's really trying to draw that correlation between progress on the LLM front and progress in the physical form. So I recommend YouTube and X primarily.
All right, Alexander, let's get into it.
All right, the first question is from David Brady in New York City, New York. Dawn Avatar Robot Cafe in Tokyo employs people with physical disabilities to provide a human touch to the robot servers. This is a win-win. Thoughts?
Ryan?
Yeah, I'll pull up that video to some extent here. So this gives you a sense for these. Now, these are not bipedal, but they are humanoid, right? So they're roving around on tracks. And so, I was in Barcelona a couple months ago, and there's this term called cobot that you're increasingly hearing. And so cobot is kind of this idea that they're collaborative. Collaborative robot is kind of what that is, kind of this, shortened word for it. And I saw a service vehicle on the streets in the early morning hours pressure washing, right? It was a vibrant street, and there was just a little bit of, litter and spills and different things that kind of need to be dealt with there in the morning. And you saw a team of 4 or 5 people, and there was kind of this guy in charge, and he'd kind of hit these things with the pressure washer, and then some guys would come behind and sweep that up and deal with the water and hit a spot that wasn't completely hit. And it just struck me as another example of a thing where you might not see the autonomous fleet operating entirely on their own, but think about the kind of multiplicative power of one kind of crew chief that's running the pressure washer, hitting some of the spots, working down the street with 4 or 5, kind of sweeping up after them and kind of taking care of the things as a unit.
Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. What do you think of the use of an AI-enabled robot for public information at the MSG Sphere?
Ryan?
So this is where a concept that's emerging right now with regard to kind of speech-to-speech communication becomes really interesting. So on one hand, think about what we've normally got at an airport or a venue like that is these kiosks that are fixed in one place. Well, if those kiosks can physically move, there might be some benefit to that. But okay, I go up and approach the kiosk. Now I need to interact with the touch screen. Is that going to really be efficient? And it may be, but it also might be efficient if I can speak to the thing and it can speak back. And so when you look at when you talk about LLM, overlap here with humanoid robots. I mean, right now, advanced voice mode from OpenAI has been something that's really intriguing people. And that's the idea that I can interrupt this thing and I can ask it to, act in a, speak in a softer tone or take any other kind of form. And I think that is one of the missing links here is we need to be able to tell it, stop. We need for it to be able to ask us a question to say, I'm dealing with this obstacle. And whether it's going to ask me that because I'm right there in front of it or send me a text message telling me about some challenge it has that it needs my input on as its, operator. I think those are some things that are going to move the adoption curve forward.
Courtney?
Another thing that they're very good at as the LLMs is handling multiple languages. And for an interactive voice-operated robot that can figure out what language you're speaking, then respond to you in that language is certainly possible now. A publicly facing humanoid robot that understands, 50 different languages is, for an information kiosk, is really a godsend because you don't have to handle translators and multiple people in there that speak different languages, especially if you're in a situation where there's a lot of tourist industry of people of different languages coming in.
And Alex.
Yeah, and one of the things from a security perspective is just presence. So there's a variety of these drones that have a variety. There's a variety of robots, and they can be humanoid. This is I was trying to find one that doesn't have an ad that fires up on front of my thing. Anyway, hold on. I just love today's thing. But anyway, they're robot security guards that are wandering around. Nightscope, I think, makes them. And they look like a pill, and they just roam around. I noticed them at the Golden One Center in Sacramento. There's like 2 or 3 of them. And I asked them, like, do these actually work? And they're like, oh yeah, 100%. He said the crime was literally went down like 2/3 by having them there because they got cameras going 360 degrees and they're roaming around outside the venue. And the police can just simply respond to where they see things. It just shows up in their security, but they're not a fixed camera. They're roaming towards things. They're slowly moving around, and they yell at you if you touch them. Don't touch me. so they're very they don't like being touched. So anyway, but I could see those growing into a more humanoid situation because one of the limitations they have is they have wheels. And they can't go up the stairs. They have to go along the ramps. They have to do those things. And you could imagine a variety of robots walking around that just make an area, especially around venues, more secure by having that. And because, venues, as we saw with Taylor Swift, are very porous, and it is almost impossible to keep them totally secure. So it's you may see more of that there.
Next question.
From Roscoe Jones of Madison, Indiana, what role have human-looking animatronics played in our acceptance of humanoid robots? Or do we prefer an uncanny valley in our robots? Note, Walt is returning to Disneyland.
Ryan?
This weekend, I was at the Chicago Air and Water Show. And so that's where all the military planes, fly around, and all the locals, ooh and ah over the capabilities of the military industrial complex. And so it has me thinking about kind of the overlap here, right? Why do we do that? Well, patriotism and kind of building enthusiasms for things that might otherwise have some drawbacks, and kind of there being two sides to the story. And so animatronics may end up, right? I mean, these companies that are doing this are probably not going to be small, and they may very well start investing in ways to get people more comfortable. Right, we talked even about like decisions on height and the voice that they use, being things that will probably impact public perception, public acceptance, and adoption rates.
Bill?
And I don't want to forget, we've already had 60 plus years of getting conditioned to this. I'm thinking back to my childhood where Rosie was a part of the family that we saw as being the future. So I think the humanification, if you can, of robots to make people feel more comfortable has been going on for a long time. I mean, yes, there are bad robots like the Terminator, and we've all seen that, but there's been plenty since the dawn of the robotic age of decent modeled robots that were helpers as much as antagonists. So I think we got a neutral playing field here.
And Courtney?
Yeah, and they did just announce at D23 that they're going to do a kind of like Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln robotic animatronic figure with, of course, Walt Disney. So he's now been replaced by his robot doppelganger. And the animatronics have advanced quite a bit in their actuators once they went to something called compliance. The animatronics move much more smoothly and much more realistically. So we've come to accept them at the Disney theme parks, and it definitely cuts down. They don't take coffee breaks or smoke breaks. They do have an occasional, hydraulic leak, which is a problem.
Next question.
This one's from me. What happens to society when robots are so advanced that they can design and build other robots even more advanced than them?
Courtney?
Yeah, that's the event horizon there. You got to worry about the singularity of that, because that's when robots can build themselves. That's a start. But when they can make improvements on themselves to increase their capability, strength, and agileness, agility, I guess is the word, then you really got to worry. Then look out for the Terminator.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that, and I worked in an A-Life company 30 years ago, so, I got to think about this for a while. I think that the dangers of that are probably further away than we think. So I think that I think that you will see robots and AI improving itself, improving those things, but it get into a singularity or making decisions. Now it could potentially make horrible decisions, not so much because it reached singularity, just because there was a bunch of conditions that had it have it make a decision. We used to have problems. I used to animate the robots for Star Wars. We had these robots that would run around, and before that we had these little creatures that would run around, and you would program them and you would tell them different things. But if you gave them lots of different, in one of the cases, you could pat its head like digitally, like tell it it's doing a good thing. The really interesting thing is that you could constantly give it, you'd hit a keystroke and tell it it's doing the thing you want it to do, and you were training it. So you could train this thing because it came up with nothing. Like when it started in the game company I was in, it didn't even know how to move its arms. So it'd sit there and try to figure out how to move, and then as it started to move, you would give it positive reinforcement to have it do the thing that you want it to do. If you gave it the wrong reinforcement, and this is why this applies to it, if you gave it not so much the wrong reinforcement, but cross reinforcement. So you tell it constantly it's doing something good, and then you start telling it it's doing something bad. When it reached the stimulus that was related to the positive and negative reinforcement, it would literally just freeze up and start shaking because it didn't know which way to go. And I thought that was a really interesting human response to things of, growing up. If you had a lot of cross input from your parents, but Mendel is what we called it. Mendel would sit there and start to shake because it just got caught between multiple things that it thinks it should do, and it couldn't figure out which one to do, which I thought was interesting from a human perspective. But I think that, how we train the robots and how we train AI will be really interesting.
Ryan?
This is why full autonomy is probably not what we're going to see in the earliest versions. So from a cybersecurity perspective, we know that in autonomous vehicles, they've been really focused on making sure that over-the-air updates are something that have to be cryptographically signed, and that you can't just, tap into the control systems and tell it to move left or right unless you're kind of the authorized party to do so. And so Tesla's actually spoken to that as a key milestone they need to reach when it comes to their public launch, right, or the public availability to purchase the Optimus bot, is basically the software cannot be updated remotely. And that they're going to retain some degree of influence over how it can use. And so, the point is, if the manufacturers are responsible, the idea is that there ought to be an ability to limit the progress that these try to make on their own.
Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada is asking, why do we consider robots humanoid based on form rather than based on their reasoning abilities?
Ryan?
I think it's a good question. I think the main thing I would say here is when it comes to human level reasoning, we're starting to already see that with LLMs. We're already starting to test those boundaries or look for those conditions to be met. And so, robotics, the physical form of robotics, is kind of the surface area that we're exploring here, more so than we are exploring, I think, the emotional intelligence side versus the actual kind of physical capability to be assistive. And what one could also say is that when we think about assistance in a physical form, that robot having an extra degree of emotional intelligence and human level reasoning is going to help it be much more effective in working smarter, not harder.
Bill?
I also think that form gives you a little leg up. I mean, the deepest part of our brain in terms of threat assessment, if I'm looking for forms and I see another person, I at least understand I might be able to reason with it. If I see a rhinoceros, I'm in a whole different category of fight or flight because I know I can't reason with it. So by putting robots into human forms originally, I think we already start with a little, well, maybe I can work with this thing. And I think that goes back way deep in human evolution.
Courtney?
Well, there are a couple of reasons they create robots in humanoid form besides just the emotional reaction of interacting with humans. One is the ability, we live in a world that's designed with ergonomics. In other words, the height of a light switch, where it's positioned, the shape of a chair, how you get in and out, open a door on a car, it's all based on the human ergonomics. And so to have a robot work in our human ergonomically designed world, having a humanoid form really helps it to adapt. And also having that form allows for artificial intelligence to deal with things like machine vision. It can look and make a decision on something, but if it's a static object, a static robot, it's not humanoid based. A human can kind of shift their weight to one side and look at something from a different angle if they can't figure out what it is, or look down or up. And they can move in a human-like fashion to figure out what the task is and how to solve the task. So having a human form accommodates a lot of that if they're having to deal with objects in a real world that was designed for interacting with human beings.
Alex?
I think that when you look at robots and the challenges of robots, you can't help but be struck by the amazingness of the human body or any animal body. That is, I can go, many a human being can go across many surfaces, climb many surfaces, control other things as it works. It also can reheal itself and process fuel from almost anywhere in the world. So it's a kind of an amazing machine of itself. But I think what Courtney said was spot on, that we have trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions, more than trillions of dollars dedicated to human ergonomics. So plugging something in that can manage that is very important.
And then, John, just going back to the foundation of the question, I just looked it up because I was like, when did we start using this? Actually, it went as far back as 1870, and it was humaniform. That's where the word originally came from. And then through how linguistics works, they created humanoid. But I thoroughly agree with you and what Ryan said about LLMs. We're kind of seeing that human reasoning coming about, but fundamentally, that's where the term came from. It might take a lot of work to re-engineer a lot of marketing and branding, so that people will begin to use humanoid from the vantage point of this is human reasoning. But right now, we're stuck with it being referenced to just human form. Next question.
Next one's from Rob Collins in Kansas City, Missouri. What fictional robot would the panel want made in reality?
Alexander.
Not robot, and I just want to say there's a distinction between robot and android, but I would absolutely want Data from Star Trek The Next Generation to be real, because I think I could be great friends with Data. I love him as a person. What I would not want, and I say this because I just watched Alien Covenant last night, I would not want David, who's hell-bent on destroying humanity by cultivating an aggressive alien species.
Okay, Alex.
Second on Data. Data's the one you want. So.
And Courtney?
Well, the one I wouldn't want is RoboCop 2, which is the one that had the machine guns built into its hands and could just shoot 1 million rounds a second at anything it thought was its enemy. I wouldn't want those around.
And then coming in, Roscoe says something to sweep the floor and mow the lawn. Next question.
Evan Troxel in Talent, Oregon is asking, what robots do you already own, and what are your thoughts about their usefulness thus far?
Bill?
Well, my very first one was a Roomba type thing. This one was made by Ufi, but we decided that we would try it out in the house just to see whether or not it made the vacuuming a little easier. In our house 2 houses ago, it actually worked pretty decently. Those were a floor profile that it seemed to be able to handle. This was the generation after you had to lay down a strip, so it was pretty autonomous in terms of mapping the room, being able to get under couches and furniture, and being reasonably successful. It wasn't a total solution, but it lightened the load of housework. When we moved, the next move though, our floor profile was different, and it couldn't navigate the little drops down and things like that, so it fell less out of use. And in this place, even though I think it's still out in the garage somewhere, there was another circumstance where it just didn't do the job, so they weren't sophisticated enough to really solve major problems, but it was a nice little assistant thing.
Alex?
I mean, the two that come to mind are my 3D printer, which is a robot doing its thing, and I also have I have what's kind of like a Roomba, but for my pool. So you throw it in there, and it wanders around the pool and tries to do the best it can to clean it. Although I find that this is the problem with robots right now, is that right now my printer is jammed up, and I'm trying to figure out why. And my little pool thing, I clean the pool before it cleans the pool so that it doesn't get caught up with all the stuff that goes into it. So it's kind of like it does do a surface process that I don't want to do, but it doesn't like the shallow water. It only stays in the it does all these things that aren't quite right. So it kind of gives you a sense of the problems we'll have with robots.
And Courtney.
Yeah, the only robots, I guess you could call them, is actually voice response, assistants like the Amazon Echo and the Google Home. I have those in every room, and so it's great to interact with those. And you could call them robots because they can control a lot of stuff in the house. They'll turn the air conditioner on and off. They'll turn the lights on and off. They'll dim things. They'll turn on the TV. They'll search for stuff on TV. So they do assist. Their intelligence to some degree, and they're voice interactive. I found that physical robots, like the Roombas, until they get to the point where they can pick up something and move it to vacuum underneath it, then I'm not interested. And they just haven't gotten to that level of dexterity or usefulness yet. So I haven't gotten any physical robots other than what Alex says, my robotically operated 3D printers.
Next question.
Chris Clark in Tempe is asking, do you agree that synchronized drone light shows seem to be a good example of robots plus AI in the entertainment advertising sphere?
Alex?
I don't think that they're AI. I think they're highly programmed. So they're, the light shows themselves. I don't know how much AI they're using to do that. I think they're simulated very carefully in a computer and then pre-programmed to do the movement that's there. So it's very much like what you think about with Boston Dynamics, where all those movements, it's not thinking anything right now. Like it's just simply, there's a program of what it needs to do to get to where it needs to go. I do think that drones, especially small drones, will have a huge impact when AI is applied to them. But probably the first place we'll see this is military solutions. Imagine a lot of small drones floating around through a forest, and if you shoot at one of them, they swarm. So that's the kind of thing that has been talked about for a long time. So a lot of the tools there, may or may not be available yet. I don't have any idea, but that idea has been thought of for 3 decades at least. So I think that the company I worked for a long time ago turned down the DoD to apply their technology to that specifically. So it was definitely a pretty serious conversation. So anyway, so I think that's but I think that's where you'll probably see it first, because it's just a lot of money and it would make a huge difference on the battlefield.
Next question.
Roz Humphreys in Comox, British Columbia is asking, I understand the Japanese are very active in implementing robotic healthcare assistance. Does anybody know how successful this is?
Ryan?
One thing to appreciate is that if you think about healthcare, there's a lot more that goes into it than just like the physical care on the individual. This is one of my favorite demos of a robot called Somatic. So not entirely humanoid form, but speaking to the scenarios that Alex is describing where, we're not necessarily displacing work that people really wish they were doing. This is in a healthcare setting and, able to execute kind of like a sanitization process. And you can see kind of the fact that it's got a head that's got different attachments that it swaps out. And then it can actually open the door and, move to the next facility and kind of continue to deal with that. So when you think about the idea of, healthcare being able to be more cost effective, more efficient, and just have people there to deal with the things that are requiring a real human touch, this is an area that I think we're going to see progress quick.
Courtney?
Well, I'd hate to be using that bathroom when that robot comes in. Woo! The Japanese have been working on this for over 20 years. Asmo, which I mentioned earlier, remember little Asmo, about 5'2" humanoid robot that Honda had for years. They just retired it in 2022. And so they're not even concentrating. They don't even have an Asmo 3 or whatever the next version would be. They're not continuing that type of a robot. I think there could be a little fear in helping the elderly. Helping with mobility is a good thing to, assist people getting in and out of bed, in and out of wheelchairs, those kind of jobs, which are nice. But having the problem with helping the elderly is there's a little bit of fear. Maybe they will get over that of advancements that are not human. And I think you're going to have that with assisting elderly for healthcare assistance and so on, because there's a lot of fear of, a lot of patients. If you go into nursing homes, I've spent a lot of time in them, not myself, but where other people, there's a lot of fear and trepidation of the people that are patients, and they don't like people touching them, much less a robotic hand lifting them up and down. So I think the acceptance is going to be a very steep climb to get the acceptance of humanoid robots in elder care.
Bill?
I just wonder if this is going to be a generational thing that's going to fade a little bit. And I'm thinking of things like Neopets that kids had for a long time, gave them a little conditioning in dealing with something that was not humanoid, or just having an emotional bond, or thinking of something in terms of care for with little robotic things. So it may, I just have a suspicion it may change over the course of the generational shifts here. My 2 cents.
And Alex?
I think that there's going to be two things. I think one is that I think there's some people that are going to very much embrace this. There's going to be part of society that embraces it. But I am going to predict that at some point there's going to be areas or people or communities that say that they don't want any robots at all. Like, that they don't, it's the whole Star Wars, we don't serve those kind here, kind of thing. And at some point, they're just going to want to separate from that. And so I think you're going to see that over probably the next couple decades of some societies that just don't want to have any part of it, and some societies that have them completely embedded into what they're doing.
Next question.
Rod Collins in Kansas City, Missouri is asking, what positions do you see humanoid robots being in where humanoid is the right form factor?
Ryan?
Anywhere where you've got an unsteady surface is where that bipedal kind of comes in. I mean, there are certain scenarios where you could see tracks being better if it's like a muddy field. But, when we have stairs involved, and so if you think about in the home, right, all the problems that a Roomba has that Bill's already spoken to inside the home is going to be a place where I think it's going to be particularly useful. Now, height and size, different thing. But Alex brought up, where's a light switch? Where's a light bulb? There are things that might be beneficial there. But in construction, we're pretty bullish on this. When we think about the job site and that, I showed that graph that showed kind of the unstructured environment, in a shop floor, wheels, tracks, more specialized devices might be more useful. On a construction job site in an unstructured environment, that's where humanoid is going to do better than non-humanoid.
Alex?
Yeah, anywhere with stairs. so that's going to be, but I think that also if you're retrofitting something, again, I think fast food is probably going to be something that gets impacted by robots fairly quickly because of a lot of this isn't so much the robots can't do it, it's that they didn't pencil out. So the cost of robotics goes down, especially humanoid robotics, and the price of labor goes up, the two of them at some point cross. And as soon as that happens, it's not something that happens slowly. It's kind of like a catalyst, and suddenly everything just goes whoop, and it all happens very, very fast. And former CEO of McDonald's has talked about it a lot. So so that as soon as that cross happens, where they can amortize it over a certain number of years, that's what they're waiting for. And so as the cost of labor goes up, the amortization makes more sense as the cost of robotics goes down. That all starts to, and there'll be a point where it hits, and as soon as it hits, you'll start to see it move very, very quickly down the path. Especially because McDonald's is having trouble even getting people to come back. I don't know if this will help, but it would. But the other thing, though, I think is I do think construction is going to be a big piece of it, because we're very short on construction workers. It's dangerous work. A lot of times it's withering work, or it can be, and robots could do a lot of those things that a human can't do, or that we don't necessarily even want a human to do. One of the things that I think is going to be interesting as robots allow humans to become more efficient is that sometimes efficiency isn't as good as you think it is. I was brought in to analyze a construction site at one point, and I took time lapses of the construction. So I would just leave a camera there all day and watch everybody work. And my job was to show how you could use media to make the job site more efficient. So one of the things we noticed is there was one guy that was constantly, you don't notice it when they're watching, but there was this guy walking back and forth, and his tools were in one place and he was walking on the other part of the job site. And we realized he's losing a quarter of the day walking back and forth, where he could, if he just moved the tools over to where he was working. They asked him to do that, and he did it for a week and quit because it was too stressful now. What he liked was being able to take a break and walk over and get the things. But when they said he couldn't do that anymore, he didn't want to work there anymore. And so that was making it more efficient. Sometimes people need a little bit of room as well.
Bill?
Well, there's also all of these transitional times where, for example, and this is just one example out of many, you've got a lot of trucks on the road right now. And so if you're going to design a robot to to take the transitional period where you still have tens of millions of trucks out there and you want to robotize the driving of those in some sense, creating the robot to fit into the form factor of the driver's cab, which was designed for a human being, might be a transitional step you'd want to go through. So I think you have to look at each individual task and say, in what way do we strip out everything and put in a dedicated system? And in which case do we create robot forms that are designed to be where humans used to be and fit the same way? So that's my thinking.
And Courtney.
Well, we have robots in my neighborhood right now. I yesterday was out. There was a Waymo driverless car driving around delivering people. So there's driverless taxis, and you don't need a humanoid robot sitting in that chair to control to automatically drive the car. There are certain things when robots, humanoid robots, can do construction by climbing a ladder to a second floor roof with a roll of tar paper over their shoulder. Then they're going to make some inroads into the construction market, but not until then. They're not very good. Robots are not very good for evil guys in stories. I always thought that the Daleks were very stupid because to avoid them, all you had to do was go up some 3 stairs. And I did last night. I was walking around, and we have these little robot delivery carts that run around delivering food in the neighborhood. They go across the street. They wait for the lights, and they're little, about the size of a baby carriage. And so I was walking along the sidewalk in front of one, and it crossed the street. And then I noticed I passed a plant that had grown out and kind of was growing over the sidewalk. You can easily brush by it. It was a very lightweight plant. But the robot was following me. I walked right past the plant, and the robot stopped at the plant because it was kind of blocking its way. And it sat there for about 20 minutes, just blocked by a little plant that was hanging over the sidewalk. So, they're not necessarily good in solving problems that they haven't come across before.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, do we include teaching teddy bears into humanoid robots? What other new forms of socially and emotionally persuasive technology are considered humanoid?
Alex?
I mean, I think many kids have grown up with little robots that do funny things that aren't necessarily, there's no AI in them, but there will be soon. But they move around and they make noise and they cry when, they do whatever that you want them to, that they're designed to do, based on very, very simple interactions. But I think that what we're going to see is probably much more complex interactions as we go forward.
I instantly had a Teddy Ruxpin flashback.
I was thinking Teddy Ruxpin. I was like, I was like, I don't think I ever had a Teddy Ruxpin, so I didn't want to use it as an example because I couldn't remember what it did.
Yeah, but can you imagine that, as you said, just with where we are, if there's some LLM or there's someone out there working on that to actually respond to the kids, so it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Next question.
Roz Humphreys in Comox, British Columbia is asking, what are some of the most interesting robots seen out in the likes of CES, etc.?
Ryan?
Interesting. CES is one of those things that happens only once a year, and what that is to say that it doesn't move fast enough, right? So I've got a little bit of a kind of series here, and I'll just click on a couple of these really quick so you can see. I don't know why that's blurry. But here's the latest from Boston Dynamics that
we
just
can't
came out a couple weeks ago. You seen any of that? Oh, here we go. Here's the
Thanks.
Boston Dynamics bit. This was kind of their Atlas 2 that moved to an electrical system. We've got one here from Astrobot, and just a little bit different form right here. They're showing kind of household tasks, opening a bottle of wine, and if you kind of click through, you can see it actually serving the wine.
That's great.
Playing around, watering household plants, right? So I don't know if it's efficient at these things yet, but here's the latest one from Tesla. And there's one more brand, and this one, here picking up an egg, right? So really kind of careful touch, and then the last one from Figure that we've already looked at. So those are some of the humanoid forms that are rapidly progressing.
Bill?
2016, walking through the San Jose airport, I ran into this. It was the first time I had seen kind of that form factor. So this goes back almost 10 years. And as an information kiosk that'll travel with you, it was effective. People seem to be interacting with it. Did just fine.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan, for bringing us this conversation, and we'll continue it as we go along. And for those of you, our producers, thank you for submitting your questions and sharing all of your insights, panelists, and of course, our back-end team, for without which this would not be possible. And let's see, our Taluk Traversal, we have traveled 34,000 miles, 56,000 kilometers. That's 273 million bananas for scale. And for the schedule for the rest of the week, you can head over to officehours.global. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
This is something I see all the time in my neighborhood, is people sparring with the delivery robots.
That'd be fun.
It's after me. Oh no. Hi.
I was just noticing how that San Jose robot looked a lot like Rosie from the Jetsons, particularly. Go figure.
Yeah, probably
it also
not.
looks like a giant iPhone, which I didn't realize until I just looked at it here.
Let me give you a giant iPhone to play with. Don't you wish you could put that in your bag? They need to make one that fits right into a perfect, it's like 8 inches by 20 inches. So you can just set it in your carry-on.
Gets me are the anime eyes.
Yeah.
Traditional.
Everybody loves big
friendly.
eyes.
They have a cute little Japanese voice.
Yeah. All right. See you later.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. That was great.